Hannah stands at the altar, her blind eyes staring at nothing while her groom, Min-jun, mocks her in front of the city's elite. He balances a wine glass on her head like a cheap party trick, betting his friend she's too terrified to move. If it shatters, your father goes to prison, he sneers. He raises his hand to strike her, but just as a crowd leans in to watch the tragedy, the cathedral doors are blown off their hinges. A man in a sharp black suit stalks through the smoke, his presence so terrifying that the armed guards freeze in their tracks. It's Siwoo, the king of the Underworld, a man who hasn't been seen in public for 5 years. He catches the glass before it can fall, drinks the wine, and crushes the crystal in his bare hand. He doesn't look at the groom. He kneels before the blind girl and whispers a secret that makes her prayer beads fall from her hands. The wedding is over, Siwoo growls, pulling Hannah into his protective embrace. He turns to the shocked crowd and reveals the one thing Min-jun's family tried to hide. Hannah isn't a debt payment. She's the only person alive who knows where Siwoo's missing billions are hidden. As he carries her out, he leaves the groom with a warning that will ruin his family by dawn. The world thought she was a victim, but the Mafia boss just revealed she is the most powerful woman in the city. The grand cathedral was filled with a heavy scent of lilies and the sharp, mocking laughter of the city's elite. Hannah stood at the altar, her slender frame draped in cream silk that felt more like a shroud than a wedding dress. Her eyes, clouded and unfocused, stared to a world she could not see, while her fingers desperately traced the smooth surfaces of the wooden prayer beads in her hands. She could hear the rustle of expensive suits and the cruel whispers of socialites who saw her as nothing more than a tragic prop in a business deal. Min-jun, the man she was being forced to marry, leaned in close. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and arrogance. "Keep your head up, Hannah," he hissed, his voice cutting through the soft organ music. "Don't ruin this for me with those pathetic tears. You're lucky I'm even willing to take a broken toy like you to entertain the front row of his wealthy friends." Min-jun reached for a glass of red wine from a passing waiter. With a cruel smirk, he balanced the crystal glass directly on top of Hannah's head. A few guests gasped, but most simply chuckled, waiting to see the party trick. Hannah went perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew that if she moved, the wine would ruin the dress her father couldn't afford, and Min-jun's temper would flare. "Stay still, little doll," Min-jun teased, raising his hand to flick her ear and send the glass shattering to the floor. But the strike never landed. The massive oak doors of the cathedral didn't just open. They exploded inward, the sound echoing like a thunderclap against the vaulted ceiling. The music died instantly. A cold, sudden draft swept through the hall, carrying the scent of rain and expensive tobacco. A man in a sharp, midnight black suit walked down the center aisle. He didn't run. He moved with the slow, terrifying confidence of a predator who knew he had already won. The sunlight from behind him cast a long, dark shadow that stretched all the way to the altar. It was Siwoo. The mere sight of him caused the armed guards at the door to drop their gazes, their hands trembling at their sides. Siwoo reached the altar in seconds. Before Min-jun could react, Siwoo's hand shot out, catching the wine glass before it could tilt. He didn't move it away immediately. He held it steady, his eyes locked on Min-jun with a gaze so lethal the groom actually stumbled back. Siwoo lifted the glass, drank the wine in one calm motion, and then crushed the crystal in his bare fist. The sound of breaking glass was the only noise in the silent church. "This wedding is over," Siwoo said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the guests shiver. He turned toward Hannah. His expression, which had been like ice, softened. He knelt on one knee before her, a gesture that sent a shockwave through the crowd. "The girl is blind, but her family's debt is clear," Siwoo said, his voice now a low vibration meant only for her. "I bought that debt this morning, Min-jun, which means I own the contract. And I don't let people play games with what belongs to me." Hannah felt a large, warm hand wrap around her trembling ones. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was about to fall. Siwoo stood up, pulling her protectively against his chest. He scooped her up into his arms, his hold firm and shielding. As he turned to carry her out, he stepped over the discarded wedding veil. Min-jun stood frozen, his fist clenched in useless rage, watching his pride and his prize walk out the door in the arms of the king of the Underworld. Hannah leaned her head against Si Woo's shoulder. She didn't know where he was taking her, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the dark. The car ride was silent, the only sound being the soft purr of a high-end engine and the rhythmic clicking of Hannah's prayer beads. She sat stiffly in the back seat, her knees pressed together and her head bowed. She could feel Si Woo's presence beside her, a wall of heat and quiet power that made the small space feel even smaller. When the car finally stopped, the door was opened by a man who moved with military precision. Si Woo didn't wait for her to struggle. He reached in and gently guided her out, his hand firm on her elbow. As they walked, the ground beneath her feet changed from gravel to smooth, cold marble. The air changed, too. It no longer smelled of the city's exhaust or the church's suffocating lilies. Instead, it smelled of expensive sandalwood, old books, and the crisp scent of the ocean. "You are my home now," Si Woo said. His voice echoed off high ceilings, sounding deeper and more resonant than it had in the cathedral. "No one enters this place without my permission. That means you are safe." Hannah trembled, her sightless eyes darting toward the sounds of footsteps. "Safe?" she whispered, her voice small. "The world says you are a monster, sir. My father said you would break me if he didn't pay." Si Woo stopped walking. He turned to face her, though he did not let go of her arm. "Your father is a man who trades his blood for paper," he said coldly. "I do not break things that are already fragile. I protect them." He led her to a large, velvet armchair that felt softer than anything she had ever touched. As she sat, she heard him walk to a heavy desk. There was a sound of liquid being poured into a glass. Water, not wine. He walked back and placed a glass in her hand, ensuring her fingers were wrapped securely around it before he let go. "This is your sanctuary," he continued, his tone distant but strangely respectful. "There are no cameras in your room. No one will touch you. You will be fed, you will be clothed, and you will be left in peace. In return, you will stay within these walls." Hannah clutched the cool glass, her heart slowing for the first time that day. She had expected chains, or worse. She had expected the same sneering cruelty she had received from Min June. But Si Woo spoke to her like a person, not a piece of property. He didn't mock her blindness or treat her like a child. He treated her like a guest of honor in a fortress built of shadows. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why save me?" Si Woo stood by the window, his silhouette blocking the moonlight. He looked at the girl who sat so small in his massive chair, still clutching her wooden beads, as if they were her only lifeline. He didn't tell her about the secret hidden in those beads, or the debt that went back generations. Because, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum, "I decided you were worth more than the debt, and I always collect what is mine." As he walked out, leaving her in the quiet luxury of the room, Hannah realized that while she was still in a cage, the bars were made of silk, and the lion guarding the door was the only one who had ever looked at her and seen a human being. The sun had not yet risen when Hannah heard the heavy thud of boots on the marble floor. She was sitting by the window of her new room, her fingers moving restlessly over the wooden prayer beads. The morning air was cool, but she jumped when the door opened. She didn't need eyes to know it was Si Woo. The air in the room seemed to tighten whenever he entered. "You haven't put them down once," Si Woo said, his voice closer than she expected. "Those beads. Do you even know what they are?" Hannah clutched the string tighter against her chest. "They were my grandfather's," she whispered. "When my family lost everything, these were the only thing the debt collectors didn't take. They thought they were worthless wood. They are all I have left of a time when I wasn't a bargain to be traded." She heard the soft rustle of his suit as he sat in the chair across from her. "Your grandfather was not the simple man your father claimed he was," Si Woo said. "He was a man who saw the storm coming. He knew your father would gamble away the family legacy, so he hid the true wealth where no bank or lawyer could touch it." Hannah felt a shadow cross over her as Si Woo leaned forward. He reached out, his gloved hand gently brushing her fingers to take the beads. Hannah hesitated, then let him take them. She heard a faint metallic click, a sound so tiny she would have missed it if she weren't blind. "The third bead," Si Woo explained, his voice low and serious. It's not wood. It's a disguised casing. Inside is a microchip, an encrypted key to a digital vault. It holds the locations of gold reserves and, more importantly, a ledger of every bribe and secret deal made by the city's elite over the last 50 years. Hannah's breath caught. Is that why Min Jun wanted to marry me? Did he know? He suspected, Siwoo said, the beads clinking as he handed them back to her. But he didn't want the beads for the money. He wanted the ledger to destroy his rivals. If that key falls into the wrong hands, the city will burn. I didn't save you out of charity, Hannah. I save you because as long as you hold those beads, you're the most hunted person in Daxia. Hannah felt the weight of the wood in her palm. It no longer felt like a simple comfort. It felt like a bomb. Then I am just a different kind of prisoner to you, she said, her voice trembling. Siwoo stood up, his footsteps retreating toward the door. He paused at the threshold. Min Jun would have killed you the moment he got that key. I will keep you alive to protect it. There is a difference, Hannah, whether you believe it or not. The Emperor does not steal from the innocent. Sleep now. Tomorrow, the hunt begins in earnest. The door closed, leaving Hannah alone in the silence. Clutching a fortune she couldn't see and a secret that had just turned her world into a battlefield. The sun was high in the sky when a group of nervous, whispering people was brought into the main hall. They were Hannah's old staff, the maids and caregivers her father had hired to watch over her. Hannah stood by the sofa, her head bowed low, her shoulders hunched as if she expected a blow. When she heard the familiar voice of her former head maid, she instinctively took a step back, her hand flying to her wooden beads. You blind brat, you have no idea the trouble you've caused, the head maid hissed, ignoring the silent guards in the room. The master is furious. When we take you back, you'll be lucky if you're allowed to sleep in the shed. Hannah didn't answer. She simply lowered her head further, her chin touching her chest. She had been trained since childhood to be silent, to be invisible, and to apologize for the burden of her existence. A cold, heavy silence suddenly filled the room. Siwoo stepped out from the shadows of the upper balcony. He didn't say a word as he descended the stairs, but the temperature in the hall seemed to drop with every step he took. He walked straight to Hannah, but he didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the staff. Is this how you spoke to her in her father's house? Siwoo asked. His voice was dangerously quiet, like the rattle of a snake before it strikes. Sir, you don't understand, the maid stammered, her face turning pale. She is difficult. She is a burden. The only burden I see in this room is you, Siwoo interrupted. He turned to his lead guard. Pay them for the month, then throw them out. If any of them are seen within 10 miles of this estate again, make sure they never speak another word to anyone. The staff was dragged out, their pleas for mercy fading into the distance. Hannah stood frozen, her heart racing. She waited for Siwoo to turn his anger on her, for the lecture about how much she was costing him. Instead, she felt a firm hand under her chin. Siwoo gently but insistently forced her to lift her head until she was looking toward his face. Listen to me, Hannah, he said, his voice firm. I did not bring you here to be a servant or a victim. In your father's house, you were taught to bow so you wouldn't see the world looking down on you. But in this house, you don't bow to anyone. Not to the staff, not to your enemies, and not to me. Hannah's breath hitched. But I am blind. I am nothing without someone to lead me. Being blind does not mean you are small, Siwoo replied, his thumb grazing her jawline. From now on, you walk with your chin up. If the world wants to look at you, let them see a queen. If they don't like what they see, I will be the one to deal with them. Do you understand? For the first time in her life, Hannah didn't nod out of fear. She slowly straightened her spine, feeling the strength of the man standing before her. She wasn't just a girl with a secret anymore. She was learning how to stand tall in the dark. The night was thick and heavy, the kind of silence that usually promised peace, but for Hannah, the air felt charged with strange electricity. She sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers dancing over her prayer beads. Suddenly, the distant, rhythmic hum of the estate security system changed. She heard the soft thud of rubber saws hitting the grass outside, followed by the faint metallic snip of wires being cut. Siwoo, she whispered to the empty room, her heart beginning to pound. Seconds later, the power cut. The mansion was plunged into a darkness so absolute that even the moonlight seemed to flee. For the sighted, the world had just ended. For Hannah, nothing had changed. She stood up, her ears picking up the sound of a window shattering 3 floors below. A heavy door creaked open, and she felt the familiar, cold presence of Siwoo. He moved into the room, but his footsteps were uneven, hushed by caution. "Hannah, stay down," he breathed. "They've cut the lines. I can't see a thing." "I can," Hannah said, moving toward her with a confidence that surprised them both. She reached out and found his arm, her grip firm. "There are 4 men in the hallway. Siwoo. 2 are by the stairs, and 2 are creeping toward the master suite. One of them has a heavy limp. I can hear the drag of his boot." Siwoo froze, his body tense like a coiled spring. In the total blackness, he was blind, but Hannah's world was alive with sound. She led him out of the room, her bare feet making no noise on the marble. "Stop," she whispered, pulling him back into a shallow alcove. A second later, a man rushed past, the scent of gunpowder and sweat trailing behind him. Siwoo moved like a shadow, a muffled struggle following as he neutralized the assassin in the dark. 3 left, Hannah murmured. "One is directly behind that door to the left. He's breathing heavily. He's nervous." Siwoo followed her lead, trusting her completely. She was his eyes in the void. As they reached the narrow service hallway, Hannah's head snapped toward the ceiling. "Down!" she cried. She shoved Siwoo toward the floor, just as a silenced gunshot whistled through the air where his head had been. She had heard the click of the safety being disengaged from a vent above. Siwoo fired back into the darkness, guided by the direction of her voice. A heavy body fell from the rafters. When the emergency lights finally flickered to life, the hallway was a scene of chaos, but Siwoo stood unharmed. He looked at Hannah, who was still clutching her beads, her face pale but her expression steady. He realized then that she wasn't just a girl he had rescued. She was the only person in the world who could see the dangers he was blind to. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with a new kind of respect. Hannah simply nodded, her chin held high as he had taught her. "In the dark, Siwoo, we are all equal. I just know the way better than they do." The morning sun shone brightly as Siwoo's sleek black limousine pulled up to the entrance of the Golden Needle, the city's most exclusive luxury boutique. It was a place where only the ultra-wealthy shopped, and the staff were known for being as snobbish as the prices were high. Siwoo stepped out and reached back to guide Hannah. She was dressed in a simple, modest outfit, her hand tightly gripping her prayer beads as the sound of the busy street overwhelmed her. "Hold your head up, Hannah," Siwoo reminded her quietly, his hand steady on her arm. "You are not here to ask for a favor. You are here to take what you want." As they stepped inside, the chime of the door brought 3 shopkeepers scurrying forward. However, when they saw Hannah, a girl with unfocused eyes and a cheap string of wooden beads, their smiles vanished. They looked at Siwoo's expensive suit with greed, but they looked at Hannah with pure disdain. "I'm sorry, sir," the lead manager said, blocking their path with a fake, sugary smile. "We are currently by appointment only, and I'm afraid we don't allow pets or people who might accidentally damage the delicate fabrics. Perhaps there is a charity shop down the street more suited for the young lady." The other shopkeepers giggled behind their hands. One of them whispered just loud enough for Hannah to hear, "Why would a blind girl need silk? She can't even see the color. It's a waste of good dress." Hannah flinched, her grip tightening on her beads. She felt that old, familiar shame rising in her throat, making her want to shrink into the floor. But the air in the boutique suddenly turned freezing. Siwoo didn't raise his voice, but the power in his tone made the hangers on the racks rattle. "What did you just say?" The manager turned pale, realizing too late that the man standing before her wasn't just wealthy, he was dangerous. I just meant... "You meant that your eyes are as useless as your manners," Siwoo interrupted. He pulled out a black titanium card and tossed it onto the glass counter. "I was going to buy this entire collection for her. But now, I think I'll buy the building instead. And my first act as the owner will be to ensure none of you ever work in this industry again." He turned to his lead guard, who was already on his phone. Within minutes, the shopkeepers were trembling, their faces white as they received termination notices on their tablets. Si-woo ignored their pleas for mercy. He walked over to a rack, pulled down a gown made of the softest midnight blue velvet, and placed it in Hannah's hands. "Feel this, Hannah," he said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the ice he had shown the staff. "You don't need to see the color to know it's beautiful. From now on, you only wear the best, because the world needs to know that you are under protection of the king." Hannah ran her fingers over the smooth, cool fabric, a small, brave smile finally touching her lips. She stood taller, realizing that with Si-woo by her side, the world's cruelty could no longer touch her. The afternoon sun struggled to pierce through the heavy curtains of the mansion's drawing room, leaving the air feeling thick and uneasy. Hannah sat on the edge of a velvet chair, her fingers moving with frantic rhythm over her wooden prayer beads. Across from her, she heard the rustle of cheap silk and the sharp, overly sweet scent of jasmine perfume. It was her stepmother, the woman who had sold her like a piece of unwanted furniture only weeks ago. "Oh, my sweet Hannah," her stepmother sobbed, the sound of her sniffing echoing in the quiet room. "I haven't slept a wink since that monster took you. Your father and I are heartbroken. We were tricked by Min-jun. We didn't know he was a cruel man. Please, tell me you're okay. Tell me where he's keeping you, so we can help." Hannah sat perfectly still. To anyone else, the woman sounded like a grieving parent. But Hannah had spent years navigating the world through sound alone. She heard the way the stepmother's breath didn't hitch with real grief. She heard the rhythmic, mechanical hum of something small and electronic hidden beneath the woman's collar. Most of all, she heard the faint, metallic scratching sound of someone listening on the other end of radio frequency. Min-jun. "Mother," Hannah said softly, her voice steady. "You seem very distressed. Why is your heart beating so fast? And why do you keep adjusting your necklace every time you ask me a question about the mansion's security?" The sobbing stopped instantly. The room went cold. I don't know what you mean, dear. I'm just nervous being in this house of devils." Hannah leaned forward, her unfocused eyes directed toward the woman's chest. "You didn't come here for me. You came here because Min-jun told you to. I can hear the wire, Mother. I can hear the static of the man who mocked me at the altar." In the shadows behind a heavy oak door, Si-woo watched through the cracked opening. He had his hand on the grip of his pistol. His eyes narrowed. He was waiting to see if Hannah would break, if she would run to the woman who raised her. Hannah stood up, her chin held high just as Si-woo had taught her. She didn't reach out for the woman's hand. Instead, she turned her head toward the corner of the room where she knew the security cameras were hidden. "Si-woo," she called out, her voice clear and brave. "Our guest is wearing a gift from Min-jun. I think it's time she left." The door swung open, and Si-woo stepped into the light. The stepmother screamed as the Mafia boss approached like a dark cloud. He didn't even look at the woman. He looked only at Hannah, a flash of genuine pride crossing his stony features. "You heard the lady," Si-woo growled, his voice vibrating with a lethal edge. He reached out and ripped the hidden microphone from the woman's dress, crushing it under his boot. "Tell Min-jun that if he wants to hear my secrets, he should come and ask me himself. If he sends a snake like you again, I won't be so polite." As the guards dragged the wailing woman away, Si-woo walked over to Hannah. He didn't speak at first. He simply took her hand, his thumb tracing the back of her palm. "You saw through her," he whispered. "I didn't need eyes, Si-woo," Hannah replied, a small, sad smile on her lips. The truth always makes a different sound than a lie. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden fingers across the floor of Si-woo's private office. Hannah sat quietly on the leather sofa, her hands resting in her lap as she worked the familiar wooden beads between her fingers. Si-woo was behind his heavy desk, his voice low and commanding as he held a meeting with his top lieutenants. To most people, the room was filled with the smell of expensive coffee and the rustle of maps, but to Hannah, it was a symphony of heartbeats and breathing patterns. "Min-jun's family is desperate," Si-woo said, his voice like grinding stones. "They are leaking our shipping routes to the authorities. Someone is feeding them internal data. I want to know who is talking." The three men standing before the desk began to offer their reports. Hannah listened intently. She didn't know their faces, but she knew their voices. One was deep and raspy, another was smooth and fast, and the third was hesitant. As the third man, Lieutenant Park, began to explain the security protocols, Hannah's hand froze on her beads. A sharp, rhythmic sound cut through the air. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. It was a nervous habit. A finger drumming against a thigh or a holster. It was a very specific, irregular rhythm, like a broken clock. Hannah's mind suddenly flashed back to the cold, echoing cathedral on her wedding day. She remembered standing at the altar, her heart breaking, while a man stood just behind Min-jun, making that exact same sound. The tap-tap-tap had been the soundtrack to her humiliation. The security logs were wiped before I could check them, boss, Lieutenant Park said, his voice steady, but the tapping continued, growing faster and more frantic. Hannah stood up slowly, her sightless eyes turning toward the sound. The room went silent. Si-woo looked at her, his brow furrowing. He knew by now that when Hannah moved, it was for a reason. "Hannah, what is it?" Si-woo asked, his hand moving toward the drawer of his desk where he kept his pistol. Hannah didn't point, but she tilted her head toward a man on the far left. "The rhythm," she whispered, her voice clear in the quiet room. The man who stood behind Min-jun at the altar, the man who whispered to him that the priest was ready. He had a nervous finger. He played a song on his leg while I was being mocked. She took a step forward, her voice growing stronger. "He's playing that same song right now. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap." The tapping stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Si-woo stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. He didn't need to ask for a confession. The way Lieutenant Park's breathing suddenly hitched into a panicked gasp told him everything he needed to know. "You were at the wedding, Park?" Si-woo asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "I don't recall sending you there." "Boss, I can explain." Before the traitor could finish, the other two lieutenants had him pinned against the wall. Si-woo walked around the desk, stopping in front of Hannah first. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent thank you for seeing the one thing he had missed. He realized then that while his enemies thought Hannah was his weakness, she was actually his most lethal weapon. "Take him to the basement," Si-woo ordered, his eyes never leaving the man who had betrayed him. "It seems my blind queen sees more than all of you combined." The mansion felt different after the exposure of the traitor. The air was no longer thick with suspicion, but a new, quieter tension had taken its place, one that centered entirely on the girl who sat by the fireplace, her wooden beads clicking softly in the firelight. Si-woo stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching Hannah. He was a man who had built his empire on violence and fear, yet he found himself frozen by the sight of her simple, quiet strength. Hannah was humming a low, haunting melody, her face turned toward the heat of the flames. Despite the assassins and betrayals and the darkness of his world, she remained unbroken. She didn't ask for pity, and she never complained about the light she couldn't see. Si-woo realized that while he had saved her from a marriage, she was saving him from becoming a ghost in his own home. He was beginning to care for her, a realization that was more terrifying than any war with a rival syndicate. "You're staring," Hannah said softly, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. She didn't turn her head, but a small smile played on her lips. "Your breathing changes when you watch me for too long. It becomes heavy, like you're carrying a secret." Si-woo stepped into the room, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his face. "I am a man of many secrets, Hannah," he replied, walking toward her. He sat in the chair opposite her, his eyes tracing the delicate features of her face. "But there is one I am tired of keeping." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a file. It was a collection of medical reports from the world's leading eye surgeons. For weeks, he had been scouring the globe in secret, sending Hannah's childhood medical records to every specialist from Zurich to Tokyo. He hadn't wanted to give her false hope, but the latest report from a top surgeon suggested that her blindness wasn't permanent. It was a result of a neglected injury that could be repaired. "I have been looking for a way to give you back the world," Si-woo said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate hum. "There is a doctor. He believes that with the right surgery, you could see again." Hannah's hand stopped on her beads. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the wood in the fire. "Why?" she whispered. "If I can see, I might realize that the man who saved me is as dangerous as they say. Why risk letting me see who you really are?" Siwoo reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before he finally allowed his fingers to graze her skin. It was a rare moment of vulnerability for the king of the Underworld, because, he whispered, "I want you to see the way I look at you, and because a queen should be able to look her enemies in the eye before she ruins them." Hannah leaned into his touch, her heart racing. In that moment, the ghost of the Underworld felt more human than anyone she had ever known. She realized that Siwoo didn't just want a key in her beads. He wanted the girl holding them to finally see the light. The night of the Red Banquet arrived, a gala where the city's most dangerous and powerful figures gathered to trade secrets and display their wealth. The ballroom was a sea of crimson, silk, and gold, but the room fell into a stunned silence when the heavy doors opened. Siwoo entered first, looking lethal in a tailored black tuxedo. Beside him, Hannah walked with newfound grace. She wore the midnight blue velvet gown from the boutique, its deep color making her skin look like porcelain. Her long black hair was pinned back with diamonds, and around her wrist, she still wore her wooden prayer beads, a strange contrast that only made her look more mysterious. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like an empress who had stepped out of the shadows to claim her throne. "Stay close to me," Siwoo whispered, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "The wolves are hungry tonight, but I am the king of the pack." Hannah nodded, her chin tilted high. She could hear the rhythmic clinking of champagne glasses and the low, hushed tones of men who lived by the gun. Among the voices, she caught a familiar, jagged breath. Min-jun was there, tucked away in a corner with his fallen family, watching them with eyes full of hatred. "Hannah, my dear, I see you've adjusted well to your new master." Min-jun's voice suddenly cut through the air as he approached. He sounded desperate, his usual arrogance replaced by a frantic, shaky energy. He held 2 glasses of champagne, offering one toward Hannah. "A toast? For old time's sake, to show there's no hard feelings." Hannah's nose wrinkled. Beneath the expensive scent of the bubbles, she detected a faint, bitter metallic odor, the smell of a fast-acting sedative or worse. She felt Siwoo's body go rigid beside her, his hand tightening slightly on her waist. "You're shaking, Min-jun," Hannah said calmly, her sightless eyes directed toward his voice. "The glass is rattling against your ring. Why are you so nervous to share a drink with a broken doll?" Min-jun's smile faltered. "Just a toast, Hannah. Don't be rude." Before Hannah could reach for the glass, Siwoo's hand shot out. He didn't take the drink intended for Hannah. He grabbed Min-jun's wrist with a grip that made the man gasp in pain. Siwoo took the glass from Min-jun's shaking hand and held it to the light. "It's a fine vintage," Siwoo said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "It would be a shame to waste it on someone who can't appreciate it. Since you're so eager to celebrate, you should finish it yourself." I've already had enough," Min-jun stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Drink it," Siwoo commanded. The power in his voice was so absolute that a few nearby guards stepped forward, blocking Min-jun's exit. Under the cold, unforgiving gaze of the Mafia boss, Min-jun had no choice. He drained the glass, his hands trembling. Within minutes, his eyes began to roll back and his knees buckled. As he collapsed into a heap on the polished floor, the socialites who had once laughed at Hannah scrambled out of the way in terror. Siwoo didn't even look down at the fallen man. He turned back to Hannah and gently tucked a stray hair behind her ear. "The wine was bitter," he whispered. "Let's find you something sweet." Hannah smiled, realizing that in this world of monsters, she was the only one truly safe. The morning light was cold as it filtered through the high windows of the study. Siwoo sat at his desk, his expression unreadable as he connected the small microchip from Hannah's beads to a secured laptop. Hannah stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She could hear the rapid, rhythmic clicking of his keyboard and the hum of the cooling fan as the encryption layers began to melt away. "It's opening," Siwoo whispered, his voice tighter than usual. Hannah felt the air in the room grow heavy. For years, she had been told her mother died of a sudden, tragic illness, a weak heart that couldn't handle the family's declining fortune. She had carried the wooden beads as a memory of a gentle woman, never suspecting they held a scream from the past. "Hannah, you need to hear this," Siwoo said. He turned the screen toward her, even though she couldn't see it, and activated the text-to-speech software. A cold, robotic voice began to read the entries of the digital ledger. It wasn't just a list of bank accounts. It was a diary of corruption. The voice read out a specific date from 10 years ago, the night her mother died. It detailed a massive transfer of funds from Hannah's family estate to Min-jun's father. But it was a note attached to the transfer that made Hannah's heart stop. Payment for the medical intervention. The target is silenced. The estate is now ours to claim through the marriage debt. The room went deathly silent. Hannah's grip on Siwoo's shoulder tightened until her knuckles turned white. The illness hadn't been fate. It had been a calculated murder. Min-jun's family hadn't just bullied her. They had destroyed her life from the inside out, killing her mother to ensure the family would fall into a debt only a marriage could settle. They had planned to own her before she was even a woman. "They killed her," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling with a grief that had suddenly turned into a sharp, burning rage. "They took her life just to steal a name and a fortune." Siwoo stood up and pulled her into his arms. He could feel the fire radiating from her. The quiet girl was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the depth of the evil she had been fighting. "They didn't just steal a fortune, Hannah," Siwoo growled, his jaw set in a lethal line. "They stole your light, but they made a mistake. They left the evidence in the hands of the woman who would eventually find me." He pulled back, looking at her with a fierce, protective pride. "The ledger is unlocked. The world will soon know what they are. But before the police get to them, I think we should show them what happens when you steal from the king's queen." Hannah reached down and picked up the wooden beads. They were no longer a burden of the past. They were the evidence that would burn Min-jun's empire to the ground. "I don't want him to just go to prison, Siwoo," she said, her voice sounding as cold as his. "I want them to lose everything, just like my mother did." Siwoo smiled, a dark, dangerous thing. "As you wish, my queen." The following morning, the mansion felt unusually quiet. Siwoo had been called away to an emergency board meeting to finalize the freezing of Min-jun's family assets. He had doubled the guards and kissed Hannah's forehead before leaving, promising to be back before the tea went cold. Hannah sat in the sun-drenched garden, the scent of blooming jasmine filling her senses. She felt a strange sense of peace, her fingers rhythmically moving across her prayer beads. But then, the birds in the nearby trees suddenly went silent. The air grew heavy with the smell of cheap tobacco and unwashed skin, a scent that didn't belong in Siwoo's pristine world. "You look far too comfortable for a girl who cost me everything," a voice rasped. Hannah froze. It was Min-jun. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual polished arrogance. She heard the frantic scuffle of feet on the grass and the muffled groans of the guards. Min-jun hadn't come to the front gates. He had crawled through the shadows like a desperate animal. "Min-jun," Hannah said, her voice trembling as she stood up. "You shouldn't be here. Siwoo isn't here." Min-jun screamed, his voice cracking. "He's busy taking my buildings and my name. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that you're the only reason he's winning. Without you, he has no ledger. Without you, he has nothing." Hannah tried to step back, but a rough hand grabbed her arm, squeezing until she cried out. She felt a cold, sharp blade press against her throat. "Don't scream," Min-jun hissed into her ear. "I've lost my home, my money, and my pride. I have nothing left to lose, Hannah. But you are going to be my ticket out of the city." She heard the sound of a van door sliding open nearby. Hannah struggled, her prayer beads swinging wildly from her wrist. "You won't get away with this," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He'll find you. Let him try." Min-jun spat. A cloth soaked in a sweet, chemical-stinging scent was pressed over her mouth and nose. Hannah gasped. The world spinning as the darkness of her blindness was suddenly overtaken by a heavy, drug fog. Her knees buckled, And the last thing she felt was the rough floor of a moving vehicle and the prayer beads being ripped from her hand. By the time Siwoo returned to the garden, the tea was cold, the guards were unconscious, and the only thing left of his queen was a single wooden bead rolled under a stone bench. The lion sanctuary had been breached, and for the first time in his life, the king of the underworld felt the cold grip of true terror. He didn't roar, he didn't scream. He simply stood in the silent garden, his eyes turning into shards of black ice as he reached for his phone. The war was no longer about money. It was about blood. The sky over the city turned a bruised purple as the sun set. But for Siwoo, the world had already gone pitch black. He stood in the center of his command room, the sharp lines of his suit replaced by a tactical black vest. The cold, calculating businessman was gone. In his place stood the king of the underworld, a man who had spent a decade burying his rage, only for Min-jun to dig it up with one fatal mistake. "I want the city locked down," Siwoo said. His voice was a low, vibrating growl that made his most seasoned commanders break into a cold sweat. "If a rat moves an alleyway, I want to know its name. If a car leaves the city limits, I want it crushed." "Sir, the police are already watching the Min-jun estate," one lieutenant whispered. "If we move now, it will be total war." Siwoo turned, his eyes flashing with a lethal, predatory light. "Then let there be war. They touched my queen. There are no rules left." Within minutes, a fleet of 30 black SUVs roared out of the fortress, their engines screaming like hunting hounds. They didn't stop for red lights. They didn't slow for sirens. When they reached the gates of the Min-jun family's ancestral estate, the place where Hannah's mother had been betrayed, Siwoo didn't wait for a key. He stayed in the lead vehicle as it smashed through the gilded iron gates, turning the symbol of the Min-jun legacy into twisted scrap metal. His men swarmed the grounds like a dark tide. There was no negotiation. Every guard who raised a weapon was silenced. Every door was kicked off its hinges. Siwoo walked to the wreckage of the mansion, his boots crunching on expensive glass and shattered porcelain. He watched as his men systematically tore the walls apart, looking for the secret basement or the hidden room where Hannah might be held. "He's not here, boss," a soldier shouted from the wreckage of the study. "But we found his father." Siwoo walked into the room where Min-jun's father sat trembling behind a mahogany desk. The older man tried to speak, tried to bargain with the ledger, but Siwoo didn't give him the chance. He grabbed the man by the collar and dragged him toward the window, forcing him to look out at the burning ruins of his empire. "Where is she?" Siwoo asked, his voice deathly calm. I don't know. My son has gone mad. He took her to the old docks," the man wailed. Siwoo let go, watching the man collapse in terror. He didn't care about the money or the estate anymore. He turned back to his men, his face set in a mass of iron. "Burn it all," he ordered, walking back toward his car. "Leave nothing but ash. We're going to the docks." As the estate crumbled into flames behind him, Siwoo's heart burned with a different kind of fire. He didn't just want Hannah back. He wanted to show the world that the dark was his domain, and anyone who tried to hide his light in it would be erased from history. The air at the old docks was thick with the smell of salt and rust. Inside a decaying warehouse, the silence was broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the rhythmic drip of water. Hannah sat bound to a chair, the blindfold that had covered her eyes for hours finally slipping. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, the lingering effect of the experimental surgery Siwoo had rushed her into just days before the kidnapping. The doctors had said her vision might return in a flash of light or a slow crawl of shadows. Suddenly, the warehouse doors groaned open. The sound of gunfire was short and decisive, followed by the heavy, unmistakable stride of Siwoo's boots. Min-jun, disheveled and wild-eyed, scrambled backward, his back hitting a stack of iron crates. He pointed a trembling gun at Hannah, but before he could pull the trigger, a single shot rang out. The gun flew from Min-jun's hand as he shrieked, collapsing to his knees. Siwoo stepped into the light, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked like a god of vengeance, his clothes dusted with the ash of the Min-jun estate. He reached Min-jun in 3 strides, kicking him flat onto the concrete and pinning him down with a heavy boot to the chest. "You took her from my home," Siwoo growled, his voice vibrating through the floorboards. He pulled a serrated blade from his belt, the steel gleaming. Now I take everything else. Siwoo. Hannah's voice was a fragile thread. The Mafia boss froze. He turned toward her, his expression softening instantly. Hannah, don't look. Keep your eyes closed. But Hannah didn't close them. Her eyelashes fluttered, and for the first time in years, the world wasn't just a collection of sounds. A sharp, stinging light pierced her retinas. Slowly, the gray fog dissolved. The first thing she saw was the deep midnight blue of the velvet dress she still wore, now torn and stained. Then she saw the silhouette of the man who had protected her. He was more beautiful and more terrifying than she had imagined. His eyes were the color of the stormy sea, filled with a raw, aching worry for her. "I can see you," she whispered, her voice trembling with wonder. Siwoo stayed frozen, his hand still gripping the knife above a sobbing Min-jun. He looked down at the pathetic man, beneath his boot, then back at Hannah. He stepped aside, dragging Min-jun by the collar to her feet. "He murdered your mother. He tried to break you," Siwoo said, handing the hilt of the blade toward her. "The law is dead tonight, Hannah. You are the queen. You decide if he breathes another word, or if he becomes a ghost like the ones he created." Hannah looked down at Min-jun. For years, he had been a monster in her ears, a giant of cruelty. But seeing him now, shivering, pleading, and covered in his own cowardice, he looked small. She looked at the knife, then at the man who loved her enough to give her the power of life and death. Death is too quick for a man who lives for his pride, Hannah said, her voice turning as cold as the winter ocean. She looked Siwoo in the eye, her new vision steady and clear. Let him live. Strip him of his name, his tongue, and his wealth. Let him walk the streets of the city he tried to own, seeing everyone looking with the same pity he once had for me. That is his true prison. Siwoo nodded, a smirk of dark pride touching his lips. He sheathed the knife and pulled Hannah into his arms, shielding her eyes from the guards as they dragged Min-jun into the shadows. The light had returned to her world, and as she leaned into Siwoo, she realized she finally knew exactly who she was standing beside. The city looked different from the top floor of the restored Kim Corporation headquarters. For the first time in her life, Hannah didn't have to imagine the skyline. She could see the shimmering glass towers and the golden sun setting over the harbor. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, wearing a suit of pure white that commanded the room. On the desk behind her lay the wooden prayer beads, now encased in a glass box, a reminder of the secret that had saved her life and destroyed her enemies. Min-jun's family was gone. Their name had been erased from the city's ledgers, and Min-jun himself sat in a cold, gray cell, forgotten by the elite who once cheered for his cruelty. The debt that had once been a noose around Hannah's neck was officially settled, burned in the same fire that had leveled the estate where her mother was betrayed. A heavy, familiar step sounded behind her. Hannah didn't need to turn to know who it was, but she did anyway, because she never tired of the sight of him. Siwoo walked into the office, his dark coat fluttering behind him. He wasn't the buyer anymore, and she was no longer the debt. "The board meeting is finished," Siwoo said, his voice dropping to that low, warm hum that always made her heart race. "They've accepted your proposal. You are officially the chairperson. The company is back in your hands, Hannah." Hannah walked toward him, her vision clear and bright. She stopped just inches from him, looking up into those stormy eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you, Siwoo. You gave me back my sight, but you also gave me a reason to use it." Siwoo reached out, his hand settling on her waist. On his finger, a simple black band matched the one on Hannah's hand. They were no longer bound by a contract of blood and money, but by a vow made in the quiet of a chapel after the war was won. He was her husband, her partner, and the only man she allowed to see the softness beneath her new, iron-willed exterior. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, my queen," Siwoo whispered, leaning down until their foreheads touched. "I just cleared the path so you could walk it. The world sees me as the emperor of the underworld, but they don't realize I take my orders from you." Hannah smiled, a radiant, powerful expression. She looked out at the city one last time before the lights came on. She had been the blind girl traded for a secret, but now she was the oracle of a new empire. "The night is coming," she murmured, leaning into his embrace. "Let it come," Siwoo replied, his grip tightening protectively. "We own the dark." Together, they stood at the edge of their kingdom, two shadows that had finally found the light in each other. The story that began with a broken glass and an altar had ended with a crown, and as the stars appeared, the emperor and his oracle prepared to rule the city together.